Welcome to the Beau Show, the home of faith, family, and freedom. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? Everyone knows these first famous lines from the Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key. But why did he write that line? What was happening? Where was he? Who was present? And why does it matter? As we honor Flag Day on June 14th, I wanted to take a look back at our history and how a certain flag was critical to the United States and whether it still waves o'er the land of the free today. Let me set the scene. From 1793 to 1815, the French and British were at war. Due to this conflict, British ships would often confiscate American merchant ships to prevent supplies from getting to American ports, which the Americans viewed as a violation of their rights as neutrals. In addition, a group of Southern and Western congressmen called the War Hawks wanted the United States to annex parts of British Canada and Spanish Florida. This came to a boiling point on June 18, 1812, when America declared war against the British to preserve free trade and sailors' rights. For about 2 years, the Americans mainly just annoyed the British, who had to focus their attention on defeating Napoleon. But once he was defeated in April of 1814, the British sent 5,000 veterans up the Chesapeake, led by Major General Robert Ross and Vice Admiral Alexander Cochrane, to give the Americans a complete drubbing, as they called it. A drubbing they certainly provided at the Battle of Bladensburg, and even burned Washington, D.C. down. Then they turned their attention to Baltimore. Baltimore was more prepared. They had Major General Samuel Smith, a veteran of the Revolution, and had his troops well trained, about 15,000 troops in total. Fort McHenry, the key defense of the harbor, was defended by 1,000 men. It was Fort McHenry's guns that dominated the channels leading into Baltimore. On September 12th, the British landed at North Point and marched towards Baltimore. Major General Ross, their commander, was mortally wounded in the opening of that battle. But his replacement proved no less demanding, and they pushed the Americans back, marching troops within just 2 miles of the city. However, Admiral Cochrane knew that Fort McHenry must be taken to wage a successful campaign. So he attacked it on the dawn of September 13th. The bombardment lasted about 25 hours. Major George Armistead, the commander of Fort McHenry, estimated that almost 1,800 shells were fired at the fort. Realizing that shelling alone wouldn't work, the Brits tried a diversionary tactic up the ferry branch, but they got discombobulated and it went awry. But the Brits kept shelling Fort McHenry into the dawn of September 14th. The British withdrew, and the Americans hoisted the flag that would later become the famous Star-Spangled Banner. Cochrane's fleet never made another successful advance and was eventually soundly defeated by General Andrew Jackson in the latter part of the War of 1812. While the Battle of Baltimore was certainly an important one, its legacy in history was etched by a young Washington lawyer named Francis Scott Key. A week before the battle, he and Colonel John Skinner, U.S. Commissioner General of Prisoners, set out on a mission to the British fleet, seeking the release of a friend, Dr. William Beans, who had been arrested for allegedly violating a pledge of good conduct after the Battle of Bladensburg. They sailed on September 5th to reach the British fleet in the Chesapeake Bay on September 7th, and with a few days of negotiation arranged for Beans to go free. But because they had learned about the British plan to attack Baltimore, the British detained them for fear that they would alert the city and the troops. So in brokering this one negotiation, they seemed to have violated another by detaining them. The three Americans then witnessed the bombardment of Fort McHenry from a truce ship. The dawn of the 14th would be what inspired the lawyer to write. He said, quote, "Through the clouds of the war, the stars of that banner still shone in my view. And I saw the discomfited host of its assailants driven back in ignominy to their ships. Then, in the hour of deliverance and joyful triumph, my heart spoke, And does not such a country and such defenders of their country deserve a song, he asked. Key began jotting down notes on that ship and finished the poem after his return to Baltimore on the 16th of September. It was first titled Defense of Fort McHenry, and the poem was published the next day. And then later the poem was matched to the melody of To Anacreon in Heaven. Well, we don't know the song as Defense of Fort McHenry or To Anacreon in Heaven, although there are certainly both defense and heavenly themes in it. Imagine what Key and those two Americans saw: a sheer all-out assault on their new country. So he jotted down, "Oh say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming?" This was a question. Can you see it? Throughout this assault with smoke in the air, Key knew that if the Americans lost and Fort McHenry succumbed, the American flag would not be waving. It would instead be the British flag. Key writes about it being dawn because the attack had been going on overnight for 25 hours. So he wrote, "Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, or the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming." Ramparts are the raised embankments of a fortress, in this case, Fort McHenry. So he's writing about the stars and stripes gleaming as the rockets bombarded the fortified walls of McHenry. He continued, "And the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there." And then, even with this confidence, Key still ends the first stanza with a question, not a statement. "Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?" It ends with a question mark, not a period. He's asking, does it still wave? I find this really interesting because I hear it two ways. Does the flag still wave? Because if it does, then that means that America still exists. But in a second sense, does it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Meaning, does it still wave over this brave, free land? I hear that with modern ears. It's like when they asked Benjamin Franklin what the Constitutional Convention deliberations had resulted in. And he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." So I hear Key's lyrics in two ways. Does it still wave? Because if it does, it means America exists, but also waves over what America represents, freedom. That's what the British were assaulting, not just in a material battle sense, but this was about America's freedom. Now, when I and many others sing this song at sports events or other occasions, we only sing the first verse, which again, I reiterate, is a question, not a statement. There are three other stanzas that I want to provide.
On the shore dimly seen, through the mists of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines in the stream. 'Tis the star-spangled banner, oh, long may it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
In this verse, Key is slightly more optimistic. He derides the British, calling them a haughty host, and describes the light catching the gleam of the flag in the morning, but yet still half reveals, half discloses. He can't say for sure, because the smoke and the wind are obstructing the view. But in the final couplet, he sends a more defiant charge. May it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. So he's cautiously optimistic that it will still wave, and may it wave over this free land. He's hopeful.
Keep watching at epochtv.com/The Beau Show.